Today, I am going to begin talking about the chapter 16, Where the Buddha Died, in the book In Love with the World by Mingyur Rinpoche. So he is beginning his 4-year wandering retreat, and it's been quite an interesting journey so far. And now in this chapter, he arrives in Kushinagar, where the Buddha passed into paranirvana. And paranirvana could be described as the final passing beyond suffering manifested by Buddhas, as well as highly realized masters. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, his death is referred to as his paranirvana. So once he gets there, and he gets there by bus, he first leaves in a train, and then he has to go from the train to a bus to get to Kushinagar. It's not that large a place, it's more rural. And so he explores the cremation stupa, finds himself a guest house. He says a cheap guest house to stay in, and begins to settle in. He says that he realized that had a lot of turbulence in his mind the past few days, but it really had not been a serious problem. He could work with it, and he was not overwhelmed by it. And if anything could be said, it is that he spends a lot of time in this book observing his mind, which is really important, and it's perhaps one of the more essential teachings of this whole book. So he says that the turbulence wasn't the real problem, that it was really deeper than that. So at the cremation stupa, he goes into where they have a building holding a statue of the Buddha that is depicting his final moments. It's a reclining Buddha. It's a very famous statue. There are many replicas of this statue. And he then prayed for the following things. I have a list of 5 things that he said he prayed for. First of all, to stay connected to awareness, which is the essence of all turbulent emotions. So to keep being aware the best that he can. The second is to allow his feelings of discomfort and embarrassment to self-liberate. Meaning that he is able to just plain let go of them and not bring them back, just let go of them. The next is the courage to welcome negative emotions and try to work with them. The fourth is to see the waves of enlightened activity that reflect the true nature of his mind. So to make a deeper connection with his ultimate nature and his qualities. The fifth is to deepen his understanding so he could be of more benefit to beings. He is doing this solitary wandering retreat so that he can be of more benefit to beings. He's doing it so he can progress on the path. And all these things that he talks about here are really part of that. But the reason for progressing on the path is so that he can be of more benefit to sentient beings. So this is not selfish. And he mentions this, and that is that it is very important to visit pilgrimage sites, and when you're there, make aspiration prayers. This is an important point for us too, that even when I go to KTD, I will make aspiration prayers there. And they now have a set of 8 stupas that contain relics, and it's good to walk around them doing koras, is what it's called, while you're saying mantra, and make aspiration prayers. Well, after that, he leaves to find this cheap guest house, and he calls it his bridge to the retreat. And he talks a little bit about the importance of patience, that patience is important. You can't just jump into the deep water. You need to learn how to swim. And he is in the process of learning how to swim. And he realizes that he is pushing himself, but he can't push himself too hard, and that it's one step at a time. He finishes up the chapter by saying that he thought that earlier in the book, he talked about adding wood to the fire. He thought that he was starting a bonfire, but he realizes now in perspective that he had merely added a few small pieces of firewood to the fire, and there's a lot more wood that needs to be burnt, metaphorically. So that completes the 16th chapter. The 17th now is titled, What is Your Happy Dream? And this begins on page 139. He begins this chapter with a teaching on emptiness. And so there's a quote that I think sums up quite a bit of what he's trying to convey. It's on 141, quote, if we recognize the essence of emptiness of phenomena, then we can enjoy our desires without getting attached to the misperceptions that cause suffering. So I'll read that again. If we recognize the essential emptiness of phenomena, then we can enjoy our desires without getting attached to the misperceptions that cause suffering. What he is getting at here is impermanence, that the relative world is ruled by impermanence, as well as interdependence. Impermanence means that nothing lasts, and on the other hand, since every moment is new, every moment is full of potential and is fresh, that whatever has happened in the past is in the past. And interdependence is another way of talking about emptiness, and it is that whatever arises in the phenomenal world, it arises due to causes and conditions. It does not bring itself into being. And so that whatever we experience, whether it be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, first of all, it is impermanent. And secondly, it's a result of causes and conditions and is not solid. So he gets into this chapter by talking first about a dream that he had, and he describes it as being a dream in black and white, and it had a feeling of an old cops and robbers movie. And the police surround him, arrest him, and drive them off to prison. And he thinks, maybe this is about me thinking I'm going to get caught and sent back to the monastery, and being afraid of that, because this movie brought up a lot of fear for him, or this dream movie. But he said, but I love my monastery. I love my monastery. I'm not afraid of going back. But then he realizes that to him, since he did not recognize the dream seemed real and the fear seemed real. And he experienced fear. Now, he could have spent time getting down on himself, beating himself up for not being a better practitioner, for not realizing that he was dreaming, for giving into fear, and so on and so forth. But instead of that, he pivots to what he feels is more important, which is how the dream affirms emptiness. So he compares to the fear of embarrassment that he felt in the train station earlier with the fear in the dream. Both were what he describes as, quote, embodied, end quote, experiences. Real, but not true. A little further down on the page, he says, emptiness is, quote, an embodied experience that occurs when we explore experience itself, and when we discover that the seeming solidity and permanence of phenomena do not really exist. So I'm not absolutely certain what he meant by an embodied experience. I'm just going to let it go at that. He then recollects teaching one of his students about emptiness. And this is the source of the chapter title, because he asked the student, what is your happy dream? And it is having a house on the beach. That's the student's happy dream. And so then he explains that if the man would have a dream, and in the dream, this dream house burns down, that it could break the man's heart. And I will have to say that I thought of Dennis, because in this same particular section, he said, it burns down and you don't have dream insurance. So, but it's just a dream. And he says, this is how life works, that our minds are continually creating experiences that are, he doesn't say this, but our minds are awareness. We cannot be aware of anything without our minds. Without our minds, our bodies do not have awareness. I like to use the analogy of a computer and the computer operator, that if a computer crashes, the computer doesn't care. But the operator can go through a lot of difficulties and pain and perhaps even anger and frustration when the computer crashes or some other aspect of the internet is not working properly. So it is like that with our body, that everything that we experience is experienced by the mind. It might be through the senses of the body, but ultimately it is the body that becomes aware of them. And so we experience these creations of our mind as being real and being independent of our mind. So he continues to say that then we assume that we're seeing a reality out there that is independent of our minds. Continuing on this train of thought, or even you could call it a teaching, that conventional thinking is that the mind knows with ordinary perception only, that that's the only way to get to the truth. And this is why people have trouble with emptiness. Emptiness is beyond conventional thinking. It's beyond all concepts. It's beyond the five senses. So he goes on to say that beings like Milarepa, their behavior can look crazy from a conventional viewpoint. But it is not because they are crazy. It is because they realize the dream-like nature of conventional appearances. And they also have experienced the ultimate truth. So he finishes up this section by telling the story about a kingdom that had a neighboring kingdom that was an enemy. And the neighboring kingdom decided to, he used the word poison all the wells with a drug that caused delirious happiness. And the king got word of this, and he had his well protected, so it was never tainted by this poison, or perhaps this hallucinogenic drug. Anyway, the king then went amongst his subjects, kept telling them that they had been poisoned and that this isn't real, what they are experiencing, and so forth. And nobody believed him because it was too blissful. And so finally he decided to join him, and he drank water that was tainted with the same poison. The point being that as we progress on the path, we might appear to be doing things that other people think are worthless, fruitless, pointless, superstitious, or whatever. But don't be too concerned about that. We're trying to liberate ourselves from suffering. not try to fit in with everybody. So now he goes to the Parinirvana Park to practice. His first day meditating outside, so he's enthusiastic and excited about this. He does the same practice 3 times. In the morning in the park, after lunch in the guest house, and after 3 back in the park. And so this is what he does. He starts out with his motivation, which is to become free of self-centered, become free of self-created suffering in order to help liberate others. So that is his motivation for meditating this session. The second that he did was resting his mind in awareness. And he stresses the continuous effort more than, you might say, getting carried away by fleeting good results. That it is stick to it, and no matter what arises, good or bad, keep resting the mind in awareness. Then he finishes up the sessions with dedication, and he uses the word spiritual generosity, which is a very good way to describe dedication, because we're dedicating the spiritual benefits of the practice to others so that they may benefit from this, and that's very generous. Now, in the evening, he returns to the guest house, and he does the same sequence in the guest house, those 3, the setting his motivation, resting the mind in awareness, continually resting in awareness, and then dedicating the merit. And then after that, he reflects on his day, how it went. And he realized that he had a lot of first-time experiences. And that during the day, and even now at night as he's getting ready to go to bed, that he has experienced a mix of wonder, excitement, and optimism. He goes to bed with the intention to recognize the dream when he dreams it. And he explains this in another part of the book of saying, it is like before you go to bed, setting your mind to wake up at a certain time and saying to yourself, I will wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we can do that, set our mind to that, and frequently we can wake up around that time. So that's how he describes preparing for recognizing the dream, to make a strong intention to become aware of the dream when you are dreaming. And it might be making this aspiration a number of times before you go to sleep at night. Well, it works. He recognizes the dream. He gets up in the morning. Now he's out in the world. He goes to buy a roasted cob of corn, and the vendor offers it to him for free. And he is pleased about receiving that offering. And then he says that the corn was extremely delicious, nearly the best thing I'd ever eaten. And he reflects that in his dream the night before, he was flying in space over Tibet, and that he enjoyed that too, that he enjoyed being in the park. So he finishes this session in the morning with the statement that neither nighttime dreams nor daytime thoughts have substance or durability. Yet, until we wake up to reality, day and night, perceptions have the capacity to disturb our lives. That's on page 147. He then notices that his agitation is gone, that his mind is much more settled, his body is much more settled. And he notes that they may reappear or they may not. Either way is okay. So his parting advice in this chapter is to wake up in the morning with a sense of renewal, that yesterday is gone, today is a new day, and it's full of potential. The next chapter is chapter 18, and it's titled Coming Through Darkness. And this comes from a teaching that his father gave him when he was a child. And the teaching is that unless we die continuously, letting go of what has happened, we become like fungus. Quote, life forms that grow from dead matter and live in darkness. End quote. That's on 148. So that is the point of this title, Coming Through Darkness, is to live in the present, to let go of the past. We have to let go of our conditioned self, let it die, in order for us to wake up to what is. We can benefit from cultivating more sensitivity to the subtle everyday transitions. The way that we have to really let go of them, we can't hold on to them. And the lessons that these subtle transitions offer us if we are willing to see them. So he continues, if the past doesn't die, it will dominate the present moment. It will make it difficult to succeed in new ventures. It will hold you back. So he says, leave attachment behind. Again, this isn't abandoning all your possessions and going off and doing a wandering yogic retreat, but it is to leave our attachment to our belongings behind the best you can. They'll just hold you back. So he compares then the bardos of this life with the bardos of death. Because there's a continual process of death and rebirth in life. So this is the comparison or analysis that he makes, is that there is the bardo at the moment of death. There is the bardo of dharmata. And then there is the sipa bardo. The bardo of dharmata is the one where the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities appear. And the sipa bardo is the bardo in which leads us to taking rebirth. So in terms of the bardo at the moment of death, in life, due to impermanence, everything is dying and becoming something new, something different. This is an important point to make. It's not dying and then that's it. It is that it is becoming something new. He says going to sleep is like this, that as we gradually drift into sleep, that our body and our senses shut down, much like they do as you were approaching death. And again, he reiterates this idea that emptiness is possibility. It's not void. It's not nothing. It is possibility. And he says that by understanding this, this allows us to lead a joyful life. He says that by completely accepting death of the past and the non-existence of the future, we enter the deathless realm. Quote, becoming completely one with death and recognizing this union. And again, this parallels the teachings of the Bardo. He says, on the other hand, you might say admits that he's having trouble letting go of his past identities. So he acknowledges this difficulty and then lets it go, lets it pass, and says to himself, it will change. It will change because it too is impermanent. This grasping to his past identities. The second bardo of the peaceful and wrathful deities, he doesn't talk about the deities themselves, but he does say that in life, our experiences might be peaceful or rough. His experience of this life is, quote, everything is in motion, fluctuating. Nothing has quite gelled, and the atmosphere feels dreamlike. So that is his parallel with the bardo of the peaceful and wrathful deities, that everything is in motion, fluctuating. Nothing is quite gelled. The atmosphere feels dreamlike. That's where he is right now, here in this guest house by where the Buddha died. Then what happens is The third bardo, and the parallel with this life, is things begin to solidify, take the form of previous bodies. We become the person we were yesterday. He says we can change at any of these stages, but the last is the hardest. That at that stage, we have to believe change is possible and want to change. And of course, what we ordinarily do at that stage is we want to go back to familiar ground. So he says, without death, there is no life, as there is no change, flexibility, and adjusting. It would just be solid like rock. So that's his opinion of that. I'll read that again because it's important. Without death, there is no life, as there is no change, flexibility, or adjusting. And then he says we can wake up to this reality. We can actively direct what comes next in our life. We can avoid passively accepting what comes next, thinking that it is inevitable. Without vigilance, anything can become rigid and repetitive. So now he's back to his activity. He went out to the park with the intention to stay present in open awareness. In the afternoon, it rained. He went to a public toilet for shelter. Well, I can tell you this, that public toilets in India have a very strong smell. And of course, the one that he went into was. He said, I decided to be with it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to create a big story about it. That trying to push it away, create a big story, whatever, just escalates mental agitation, and it blocks the awareness, which is what he was seeking that afternoon. The rain ends, he goes back to the guest house and vows not to seek shelter from the rain again. Next day, it's back to the park. The temperature goes quite high in the afternoon. He's dripping with sweat even here in the morning. Has a noon lunch at a restaurant, and then he goes back to the guest house where they've got a ceiling fan. And he meditates under the ceiling fan. 3 o'clock, he goes back to the park. This day, again, it rained hard. This is monsoon season. He decided to stay with the rain. And after that, he did not go back to the guest house anymore to avoid heat. So he says 3 nights later, he had a dream. And that he recognizes that he is dreaming while he is dreaming. So this is his teaching on dreaming. It's easier to recognize emptiness in a dream than in the dream he could walk on water, but not in a waking state. He says the important point is to understand that the solidity we normally ascribe to our bodies is not real. And that brings a more realistic perspective to who and what we are. And this brings lasting benefit if we can keep this realistic perspective. So he continues to go to the park day after day, increasing his meditation sessions in length each day, getting more comfortable, explores more of the town. And he says more specifically, exploring my mind while I am exploring the town. He passes by a Tibetan temple, but he goes by it. And he does go into a Thai temple, which he liked because it was very beautiful on the inside. The floor was stone and cool. And he was alone. There were not other people there. He really wanted to keep by himself. That was one reason why he didn't go into the Tibetan temple. He did not want to be with other people, and he certainly didn't want to be recognized as an important person. So then he tries sitting out on a street at dusk. This is in town, Kushinagar. And he says, a swarm of mosquitoes appeared, quote, thick as molasses, end quote. He gets up and goes back to the guest house. And he finds himself, or you could say he catches himself making excuses for why he left.